Hi, this is Ben Kutchins. I'm the director of photography for the White Lotus, and this is the Go Creative Show.
Hello and welcome to the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. My name is Ben Consoli, and today we speak with Ben Kutchins, the director of photography of The White Lotus on HBO Max. Ben, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm great, man. So good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Of course. Well, we had you for Ozark. I think we had you maybe twice for Ozark, which I absolutely loved. And The White Lotus, my God, what a follow-up. This show is insane. It's an insane show. It's just awesome. And I cannot wait to talk to you about it. So thanks for being here. Before we get there, very quickly, want to mention our sponsor for today, MZ, Empowering Filmmakers. Of course, follow us on your favorite podcast app, as well as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. So, like I was saying at the top, this show is just insane. And it's crazy because like everyone is telling me, you have to see White Lotus, you have to see White Lotus, you have to see White Lotus. You're going to love it. It's your style. It's your type of comedy. And I have to say, it just totally delivered. I am completely obsessed. As of taping, I haven't seen the whole thing. I haven't seen the last couple of episodes. But all I'm thinking about all day is going back home at night and watching the next episode of The White Lotus. It has really struck a chord with people. What a great show to be part of. And I'm curious, your first initial involvement with this and what kind of attracted you to this story?
Well, I don't know Mike White before this. We'd never met. And they sent me the scripts. I know the producer, and I know one of the producers, somebody I've worked with before and that I was hoping to work with again. And he introduced us. I read the scripts, and the scripts are as bizarre as the show is. It's sort of like you read the scripts and I was like, I don't know what the tone of this show is. I really had a lot of questions for Mike, and Mike is just a genius writer. So when I got on the phone with him, or got on Zoom with him, and because everything happens on Zoom these days, when I got on the Zoom with him and I just started asking him questions, like he knew all of these characters inside and out. There was no question that he couldn't answer. Everything was very dynamic and interesting, and he's just a trip. He's so like living all of these characters, and he's very interested in the sort of nuance that we all live in. I think we all kind of live in a fantasy version of our lives, and then there's the reality. I don't want to spoil the show for you, man. You haven't seen it, so like.
Well, I want you to speak freely, because believe me, it wouldn't be the first time shows are spoiled for me, and it's totally fine. I don't think it would take anything away. However, the Mike we're talking about is Mike White, the director and writer. And I can imagine in a show like this where he has such a clear vision of who the characters are, were you able to have some freedom in the cinematography to kind of maybe take these characters in different directions or try new things? Or is Mike the type of director and writer that is very, that wants his characters to be portrayed in a specific way?
No, I think he's really open, and I think that's the sort of genius of him. Is he's very open to what the actors bring. He's very open to what I bring. He was from the beginning very interested in what my take on it and how I thought the show should look and feel, and the color palette, and how the camera moved and where the camera was in the room. He was very open to that collaboration. It's sort of one of those dream people that you get to work with, who sort of lets you do whatever you want to do, and is really interested and engaged with what it is that we're doing with the camera. He does know his characters very well, but I think he's also interested in like, okay, well, what's my take on it? How do I see our way into this world? How are we finding these characters?
That's going to make you feel good as a cinematographer. Just knowing that you're going to be heading into a project with so much collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's what we're all kind of looking for, and I think that's the beauty of working with somebody like Mike, is that I really trust him in terms of him knowing who these characters are and what their arc is and where they're going, and the ability to ask them a question at any point about whose perspective we might want to be in, or what the scene is really about, and he can answer it really simply. There's no hemming and hawing and like, oh, let me get back to you. Like he's not going to call the writer and ask him. Like he's been thinking about this a lot, and he probably stayed up the night before thinking about the scenes that we're doing, and what the nuances of the scene are between the characters, and those sort of deep interpersonal relationships that are really what interests me in photography.
Oh yeah.
How can I tell those stories of those sort of very nuanced interpersonal relationships?
Well, how much do the characters play a role in your decisions on lighting and camera movement and all of that? Like, do you get so granular that you're thinking about particular lighting and particular lenses and cameras per character?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's become a little bit more looking at the overall show and the overall arc of character, as opposed to photographing each character differently all the time. I think to me, it's more about what is the scene about, and how can I best tell the story of that scene? If each scene has 3 acts, within the structure of a show, and then you have all these different scenes that have 3 acts, how can I best tell the story of that scene? I think that there is sometimes you tend to favor different lenses for different characters, but I operate from a very like sort of gut instinct place on that. I don't sort of make rules and write down, like we only shoot Jennifer Coolidge on a 50 millimeter, I definitely do it early on in production, start coming up with ideas about what rules might be. But I don't ever stick to them like wholeheartedly. It's more of an idea. Like, it might be nice to be with this character on a wider lens throughout the series so that we feel more of the environment because they are engaging with the world more than this character who's more in their head. Something as simple as that, but those are rules that are meant to be broken as you go along.
Yeah. And to bring everybody up to speed, the show's called The White Lotus. It's on HBO. It follows the vacations of various hotel guests over the span of a week as they relax and rejuvenate in paradise. But with each passing day, a darker complexity emerges in these picture-perfect travelers, the hotel's cheerful employees, and the idyllic locale itself. I love these synopses because, like, you read that and you're like, I don't really want to watch that. But then you see the trailer, you see the characters, you see the first 5 minutes of the show, and you are totally, totally drawn in. And I have a feeling that anybody listening to this is at least aware of the show or has seen the whole thing. But when I watch the show, the cinematography for me feels voyeuristic in a way. I feel like I'm peering into these characters as if I were watching a reality show or even a documentary at some points, where I'm just watching these characters do their thing. And I almost feel like I shouldn't be. I feel like I'm seeing something that I really shouldn't be seeing. It's almost too personal in a way sometimes. And I'm curious how you would describe the cinematography. Am I on the right track here with this voyeuristic feel?
I think it threads an interesting line in that, similar to Ozark, I think I wanted to create something that was a little uncomfortable to watch, and Mike's writing is very uncomfortable. So my cinematography and Mike's writing combined is only going to make an audience feel incredibly uncomfortable. So I think the idea of like really leaning into that and leaning into the idea of perspective, because I think there's times in the show that are very subjective. And it's interesting because I've heard that comment multiple times that, we're sort of peering into their lives and it's voyeuristic. And I think that, it very much fluctuates between feeling like a very subjective experience and then being objective and stepping back and feeling like we are voyeuristic and we're watching them and we're watching something that we shouldn't be watching. And I think that's a combination of the camera work. There are very specific choices that we make where we move the camera, we step the camera back and we look through foreground. For example, the end of episode 1, the camera pulls back out of the room and you start to watch this couple have sex, and the camera lingers outside, and it goes from, a more subjective in the room experience and slowly pulls back. And so you realize you're outside the room, and it stays there for almost a solid minute.
Yeah.
I'm glad that in editing, he kept that shot there much longer than I thought we were going to. But I'm really glad that he did, because it very much sends home that message that we are watching, or somebody is watching. Somebody is going to die. So who are we? Whose perspective is this? Is this is this a criminal? Is this us? And we're suddenly watching this couple start to have sex, and it feels like maybe we're intruding. And all these couples all these people are sort of so messy and kind of gross, but then the genius of Mike White is that they are also all of us. He is self-admittedly all of those people, and has behaved in all of those ways. And I think we've all behaved in ways which we kind of looked at ourselves later and we're sort of like, oh, did I do that? Was I just rude to that waiter?
Yes.
What was, and am I the toxic person in this relationship? You know what I mean? I think all of those sort of questions, Mike is, very self-effacing. If you read interviews with him, he's very much like, yeah, these are, we're all horrible people. And I'm just sort of turning a mirror on you, and in the most basic way. But I think the idea of making an audience deeply uncomfortable, and not just to make them uncomfortable, but I think that, we sort of tend to look at uncomfortability as a failure. But I think when you're uncomfortable, you're actually kind of maybe learning the most about yourself and the world through those moments of being uncomfortable and seeing yourself reflected in people that are kind of awful. Maybe those are the moments where you actually reflect on yourself, and maybe you should be nicer to your waiters.
What I love about the uncomfortability in the show is that I feel like there's been this trend in a lot of pop culture in general, but movies and TV shows, where you kind of lean into awkward moments and it's funny. And it's been done a lot in the past few years, but not like the White Lotus. There's an awkwardness in that show that is, you're not really laughing at it. You're almost embarrassed by it because, like you said, it brings something out in yourself in those moments. I was just having that just today, driving here to the studio. I'm talking to there's a service in my hometown where you can call to get trees cut. So if you have trees in your neighborhood that are overgrown, you call and they just do it. And I've called 100 times in the past, 4 or 5 months. And I was talking to the woman today, and I'm thinking to myself, when I'm talking to her, I'm like, I think I'm the guy asking for the pineapple room or whatever it was. I was seriously thinking to myself, I'm like, Am I a little bit of a percentage of that person right now talking to this person? What am I doing? And it really did bring out a perspective that I was not expecting. I was not expecting that scene to pop out in that conversation. But I think it lends itself to the fact that when we watch these characters, we are embarrassed by them, we're intrigued by them, they're familiar to us, they repulse us. I love it. And from a cinematography standpoint, can you tell us some of the ways that you are making us feel uncomfortable? Are there some tips? Are there some things that you are doing that are tricks of the trade, tools in the lighting, camera motion, lensing that make you feel uncomfortable as you watch?
Well, I think for me, it's very instinctual. Those choices of how I'm creating that environment. I think that there are some tricks. I mean, I think the interesting thing about this show is that it takes place in Hawaii, which is we should all be happy and joyous and enjoying the wonderful view of the dolphins, jumping out of the water and snorkeling. And how could there be anything, bad happening here? So that was really the exciting part for me, is how to create this very warm kind of bright tonality, very warm tonality, much brighter than my usual work, and still create something that feels uncomfortable, that has a darkness. And I think so. The thing for me is one of the things that I'm doing lighting wise is always creating some shadow in the frame. Finding a way, either with the lighting or with where the camera is positioned, or a combination of the two, to create some darker part of the frame. and it being Hawaii, that there should be some brighter part of the frame as well, that there should be some, some contrast there between the light and the dark, but, really leaning into the idea that people are kind of half lit and that people have a dark side and a shadow side on their face, in the most simplistic way. That's sort of what I'm always looking for, is that there's some shape to the light and some feeling of the light and the dark, just as Mike's characters are holding the light and the dark simultaneously. And how do you hold those two things simultaneously is something that I'm always looking for. And this was a little brighter than what I usually do, and definitely a lot warmer than what I usually do. But I really believe in like a strong color palette. And I think in some ways, like the very blue of Ozark was a way to create an uncomfortability and create a very hostile environment. And in some ways, I leaned just really hard in the opposite direction on this show. And I think it helps create something uncomfortable too, even though these warm colors are, usually what's associated with a rom-com, or, bright and warm, this is every rom-com, but I really like the idea of a thriller that has the element of the thriller in the show that very much leans into that extremely warm color palette that I think ultimately is kind of jarring and uncomfortable, because you're not really expecting to be this thrown off in this color palette, that there is a lot of shadow in the show still, and sort of as much as I can get away with. I think it's important to tell every story individually and on its own merits, and I would never photograph two stories the same way. There's no version of this show that looks like Ozark. If I just came in trying to like implement a style into a show, then that would be so uninteresting. And I just think, you sort of honor each story.
There's such a fine line with color too, because you can't go so far that it feels like it leaves all reality. In a show like Ozark, and also this show too, you have to feel like you have to recognize these environments. You have to feel like you could be there, you could go to these places, in order for it to work, I think. And I think you really you're really tuned into how color helps support a story, helps you feel a certain way as a viewer, but also not pushing it too far. That's a really fine line, I think. And can you talk to me about the White Lotus, the color palette, and how you kind of landed where you landed? Because it is very warm.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it's a very nuanced conversation, including lots of different variations that nobody will ever see. And it's important to me that it does feel grounded. And I think that's one of the things that the show does successfully, is it feels kind of grounded with all of these insane characters. And, it still somehow feels like we're in the real world, but feels a little bit elevated. The view feels a little bit elevated. And I think that, the thing that I'm constantly thinking about is, what does your memory of your Hawaiian vacation look like? What is your memory of the time that you went to the lake and felt really scared? But those are the things that I'm chasing after. I think our dreams have a color palette to them. I think our dreams, my dreams are cinematic. I don't know that everyone's dreams are, but, my dreams when things are messed up and disturbing are dark, and I can't really see clearly what's happening. Maybe I'm looking through a window, but I can't see exactly what's happening on the other side of the window. And there's a strong color palette to it. So my memory of Hawaii has a very warm tint to it that's sort of bleached out and beautiful. And I think that that's what I wanted to evoke. What is your memory of being on vacation? Because I think that that's a more powerful way to reach you as an audience member. And I think it really, to me, it's how I know how to draw an audience in, to make you feel safe and comfortable that this is all happening in your own mind. This all feels like that time that you went to visit your sister in Hawaii. This is your memory. There's nothing to be afraid of. Come on in. The water's fine.
That's an interesting approach. I like that idea a lot about tuning into the memories of a location or the memories of something, because you do remember things differently than it was.
Yeah, I mean, everything in the world is happening through our perception and our perspective, and then take that one layer further, and now our perception is a sort of distorted view of how we felt about that time in our lives. Did you feel safe and comfortable? Did you feel alone? Did you feel warm and surrounded by love? How does it and how does that affect your memory of it? So you're taking this real event in your life, and then you're taking it layers and layers down as it gets further in your memory. And I don't think that it's something that I ever consciously decided to do. It's just something that kind of spoke to me as I started experimenting with film way back in the day, and started pushing and pulling film, overexposing, underexposing, getting really grainy images, using really fast ISO films, and how all of that sort of was evocative of a feeling. So it was never a conscious decision to sort of start doing that. And I think it's only in more recent years that I've looking back on it, and I asked myself, well, why am I doing people started asking me why I was doing it, and I had to start thinking about it. And I really feel like it's an important element to share with the audience.
Well, why did you do it? You said you were thinking on it. When people asked you why, what did you find?
I mean, it's my way to connect with people. I think we're all looking to connect, and how we do that is different for all of us. And I think we all have a very unique perspective. And it's interesting because it's unique, but it's also a shared perspective. It's really it's all of our perspective. And then how can I connect all of us, through an experience, without getting too philosophical? How do we connect?
There's a lot of dialogue in the White Lotus, and a lot of dialogue scenes. I mean, there's not a lot of action. There's not a lot of visual effects. It's almost like a stage play in a way at times. Talk to me about your techniques for dialogue, lighting, camera. What's the best approach? And I know every story is different. Every film, every project's different. But for the White Lotus, and maybe there are just some general must-haves for you for all dialogue scenes. But we've got a lot of cinematographers out there listening, and dialogue is something we have to do in a lot of our projects. So what is your kind of default way of handling dialogue? And then what were the tweaks for the White Lotus?
I mean, I feel like the greatest realization that I had as a cinematographer is that it's not about me. It's really about the audience's experience of the actors. And that really is how a film lives or dies. How the show looks is not as important as the story. And how the show feels is maybe a little bit more important than how it looks. So the feeling, the overall feeling, is something that I'm constantly chasing and protecting. And as I've worked more and more, I get less protective of the quote unquote photography, and chasing some perfectionist idea of photography, and really am I doing a good job on a whole, and creating a feeling for this, 5-minute scene of dialogue where it's really not about what the camera is doing. And then within that, within an over the shoulder and a single, how do I create a nuanced version? How do I tell a little story with the camera? And that can be a choice of center punching the actor, or going a little bit off, or maybe having the look room on the wrong side of the frame. Quote unquote wrong side, creating an element of tension and uncomfortability between the actors. As if there's some tension that's ramping up, I might ask the camera operator to just slowly pivot over and put the look room on the quote unquote wrong side. That's something that I did in several scenes in the show as the conversation got more and more uncomfortable. And those are things that you shouldn't notice watching it. Those are imperceptible things to 99% of people watching it. And probably you would only notice if you took a still at the beginning of the scene and a still at the end of the scene, you might notice that there's like a very slight shift. And I might shift it over and then shift it back. So there's very subtle things that you can do. And then also lensing. How are we seeing these characters in this 5-minute dialogue scene? Is the background, are we on longer lenses and the background is completely fuzzed out? Are we on wider lenses and closer in? Is my T-stop kind of closed down so that the world is still present? Or, sometimes you're in a conversation and the whole world falls away. Is that the feeling, that I want the audience to have? Or do I want it to be like, wow, what's all that action in the background? And that's sort of part of the scene as well. Do I want a deeper depth of field? So I feel that action in the background, or like I said before, is the world completely falling away? So there's all these like very small choices that build to a bigger whole, and in a dialogue scene, once you've sort of nailed down what the blocking is, okay, she's going to come in, she's going to stand here for the first 5 lines of dialogue, and then they're going to sit and they're going to kind of face off. And then, are we going to slowly close in? Are we going to maybe we're doing a 5-minute slow push in, rather than a lens change to cut to a closer shot, so there's all those sort of choices that we're making that affect the greater whole. And as an audience member, you're not going to notice all of them, hopefully, but they're going to help tell that story of what it is that's happening. If that camera pushes in imperceptibly during the scene, it's going to create a different feeling than if you're cutting from a 25 mil 2-shot to a 50 mil to ultimately, a 65 close up. That's going to be a very different feeling than having like a slow push. So, those are my approach to dialogue is really like big picture, give the actors the stage, create space for them. I think the number one thing that I had to teach myself to stop doing was sort of nitpicking things in the frame, going in and changing props. I very much work with second team. I try to see all of the problems that could arise while I'm setting up. Oh, that, the sun's going to hit through that window in about an hour. We might be in that close up for an hour. I don't want to be an hour into the take and then have to come in and have the grips put up a flag. Like I'm going to try to put a flag there, knowing that like once the actors come in, this is their space. So trying to do all of those things to create a stage for them as well. That it's, once they step on and they sit in, it's their time,
You had mentioned you're trying to stop yourself from nitpicking small things. So is that just your natural inclination?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we all do. I mean, I think that to me, it's very important what's in the frame. And how it's sort of arranged and where the audience's eye is going to go. Is it drawn to something that's bright in the background, and if it's drawn to something in the background, there should be a good reason that it's being drawn there,
Yeah.
I remember there's like a really interesting experiment that was done, and I think I saw it on like There Will Be Blood. There's a scene in There Will Be Blood. I think you can find it on YouTube, but it was actually tracking eye movement through a shot, as audience looks around, and it's
no way.
It's super interesting. I think they do more. I think maybe it's more than There Will Be Blood. They do it with several different scenes, but they're tracking eye movement on a screen, and I think that that's something I'm always thinking about. Where is the audience going to be looking in this frame? And if they keep getting drawn to something other than the actor, there should probably be a good reason that it keeps getting drawn there. Those are the moments where I think any moment that takes you out of the story and takes you out of the moment with the actors is really like, you sort of have to reset. You have to like recalibrate. The director, Steve McQueen, said that, he hates editing because every time you cut, you have to the audience has to reinvest in the story, because our human experience isn't an edit, so, and so anything that takes you out of it, it's like, then I have to lull you back into, oh, don't worry, everything's fine. This is the story, and you're engaged, and this is actually, oh, this isn't a story, this is real. So anything that takes the audience out and is like, oh, look at this beautiful shot, or look at this great camera move that we did. If you start thinking about that, then I have to my next move is I have to reinvest you into this as a real story, and you should care. And you're not actually watching your television or watching your movie screen.
Let's take a quick break and talk about MZ empowering filmmakers. Now, MZ is a place where you can get filmmaking education at really a high level. And I say that for a couple of reasons. First of all, the course selection is awesome. There's so many great courses on there, and it's perfect for people like us here at Go Creative Show because they're talking about directing, cinematography, post-production, visual storytelling, everything we want to know. But the other part of the equation there is not just the topics, but the teachers. Like, the educators, the people that are giving you the information, they have to be engaging. They have to be really good, or else you just can't connect with them. You know what I mean? Like for me, I'm much more of a visual learner. I'm not really good at, just even in school. Like I wasn't good at just like sitting in a classroom and listening to a teacher. Like I needed to be engaged in a different level. And MZ is really expert at that because they have teachers and people that are sharing their information that are really good at this. You know what I mean? They're working in the industry. I'm talking to people like Vincent LaFerre, Shane Hurlbut, Philip Bloom, Tom Cross, the editor of La La Land and Whiplash, does a course there. There's a brand new course now called Indie Film Blueprint, and it's basically a roadmap of how to plan, shoot, and sell your first indie feature. But the people that are teaching you are, first of all, expert in their field, working in their field, and just know how to put together a good video, really. So great courses, great teachers, and information that you really want to know. And it's all there at MZ. It really is. And when you become an MZ Pro member, you have access to all of it, which is why I'm an MZ Pro member, and I suggest you do the same. But you don't have to be. You can just buy individual courses, and that's fine. But really, being an MZ Pro member is the best way because then you're using MZ almost like a Netflix where you can just get access to everything. It's all there for you whenever you want, which is just great because, our schedules and production are kind of crazy. So you never know. You may have a week off one time and then next thing you know, you're on a feature film. So you just never know. But the good news is MZ has offered our listeners 20% off of their purchase by using promo code GCS20 at checkout, GCS20. Whether you're buying an individual course or the pro membership, 20% off GCS20. So it's all there. GoCreativeshow.com/MZ, MZED, empowering filmmakers. What was the camera package you shot the White Lotus on?
I knew this was going to be, the show is 95% handheld. So I chose, the Alexa Mini, the classic Alexa Mini, just because it's smaller. I mean, I love the Mini LF, but it's even a little bigger. And then I didn't need a real shallow depth of field for this. I was shooting on the Alexa Mini with a combination of different lenses. I had super speeds, I had Baltars, not super Baltars, but the original Baltars, which are like, I'm going to mess this up, but I think that they're from the 40s. Really old glass.
What did you like about them?
The Baltars are really interesting. They flare really, really well. Like any shot that you see in the series that has a flare in it, probably I was using a Baltar, because they're just like, there's no coating left on those lenses and they flare beautifully. They have interesting elements to it. So I use those for flares, but also for exteriors, day exteriors. I found them to be really interesting. Just the fall off around the side was very sort of lyrical. Yeah. And there was more fall off on those lenses than even the super speeds. So I use those for a lot of the day exteriors where I didn't need a lot of clarity. And then predominantly, I would say 90% of it is shot on the super speeds. And then occasionally I had some Cooke S4s. My philosophy is sort of, if you're shooting a very low light scene, it's where the lighting is really soft and a little muddy almost. You don't want to use a lens that's muddy. You don't want to use a lens that's too soft because then there's just no clarity in the image at all. So then I would use the Cooke S4s, which are a little sharper.
What were some of the instances where you used the Cooke S4s that were just darker, murkier scenes?
Probably something, I don't remember a specific scene, but probably anything where I didn't have real control over the lighting to create some real contrast, where it was just, maybe a sort of a soft wash of color or something like something in a hotel room where it's just a practical on,
Yeah.
or something like that, where it's a little bit, maybe not quite enough light on the actor's face, and so then I can still shoot it wide open and dig out enough detail in their face later. If I knew I was going to be kind of digging for detail in the shadows, and it was pretty underexposed, that's where I was using it.
Something I wanted to talk about was your use of the sunrise and sunset. Across the 6 episodes, it's pretty much 1 episode per day in the week of these people's vacations. And each episode sort of begins in the morning and ends in the evening for the most part. So you are sort of following the sun throughout the day. And I think there's been there were some really interesting uses of the actual sun in some of these episodes. And I want to talk to you about your kind of story arc, the way that you're lighting, the way that you're lensing to kind of give you that sense of an entire day passing throughout an episode.
Yeah, I mean, I really leaned into, the fact that we're in Hawaii and you have these incredible sort of sunrises and sunsets, and there is a lot of exterior work. And, there's scenes that happen in the morning on the beach, and there's scenes that happen in the evening on the beach, and at night on the beach. And so like really just leaning into those different times of day. And so I was really trying to shoot at those times. And then also in the color grading, emphasizing that feeling, I mean, often we would start shooting a sunset scene at 4 p.m. and the sun isn't setting for another 3 hours. So you got to shoot something until the sun goes down.
Yeah.
And so, color timing to like make it all sort of uniform, picking which shot I can match the lighting to for when the sun is actually going to go down, is always a challenge, but it's something that I'm really up for. I think that whenever you listen, I don't really light exteriors, day exteriors. I don't. There's always like an 18K standing by, but I think I turn it on, 1% of the time, if that. I don't think that I think probably in all 6 episodes, I would say there's probably 2 scenes that are day exterior where I turned on a light.
Really?
And it was really only just because I couldn't get enough bounce in there, or it's an overcast day, so it's not enough contrast and super muddy and flat. Yeah, I don't believe it. I don't think that you need it.
I sort of remember us talking about this when you were on for Ozark, that you're more about like, flagging and crafting the light and just kind of letting the ambience in your space, wherever you're shooting, kind of be your guide.
Yeah, I mean, I very much work in a reductive thing on day exteriors. There's enough light out there in the natural world. You're working with an 800 ISO chip. The native is 500 or 800 ISO, and you don't need more light. So actually, what you need to do is shape what's there. And I think the second you turn on an HMI, I find myself like, okay, well, now we need to bounce it because it's too hard and it looks like a light. I just feel like it often looks like a light. And the only time that it doesn't look like a light is if I like, maybe bounce it off of the side of a building or a tree, because that's what's happening naturally. It's like once you point a light in there, you have a straight 5600 color temperature source pointed at something that just looks like an HMI. So if I am turning something on, I'm beating the hell out of it. I'm putting it through multiple layers of diffusion, putting a net over part of it, or, maybe even trying to bounce it into some natural fabric. Dion Beebe is somebody that I've always loved his photography, and I could never do.
I'm not familiar. What is it? What are you loving about it?
So what he does is he does a lot of bounces. Like, for example, this like colored fabric thing hanging on the wall back there. What I've heard is that he carries like tons of swaths of different colors, and he'll just lay them on the floor and do like a floor bounce, and like that's the color that's coming. Like rather than putting gels on lights, he's like using all these swaths of fabric to bounce light. And I just find that so fascinating, and it's something that I experiment with a little bit occasionally, but I understand the philosophy, which is that, there is no light in our world that is a straight 3200 or 5600, so if you turn on a tungsten or you turn on an HMI, it kind of automatically just looks like a light because it's a regimented thing. If you turn on 5 tungsten lights, I have 2 practicals on in here right now, and both of them are wildly different color temperatures. So in our natural world, there is no daylight that is straight 5600. There is no practical that is straight 3200. So just living in that world, like it's the same thing with an HMI and a day exterior. Like I need to somehow gel it or beat it up or put it through an unbleached muslin. I mean, just to help the younger cinematographers out there who maybe don't have as much experience. The best thing you can do is start playing with like bleached and unbleached muslin, because it has a natural fiber and a texture and a little bit of color to it. So an unbleached muslin has a little bit of warmth to it that feels a little bit more like a bounce off of a wall that hasn't been painted in 20 years. So that's something that just creates a little bit more of an organic feel.
What was the name of that photographer? I want to put it in the show notes.
It's Dion Beebe. He's a cinematographer. I mean, I think he did like Memoirs of a Geisha and
Oh my God! Yes, of course.
He's a very talented cinematographer.
I was thinking like photos, as you were saying, photography, and I wasn't connecting it. But yeah, of course, I'll put that in the show notes so you guys can check it out as well. But so we talked quite a bit about the exteriors and your approach to that. We actually dive pretty deep into that in the Ozark episode, so you guys can check those out on the website as well. But I want to talk about the interiors, because the entire series is shot on location. There's no stage work. You are using real locations. You are in Hawaii. You are in an actual hotel. And with that comes shooting interiors in real hotel rooms. So you don't have the luxury of being on set and fake ceilings and wild walls. You have none of that. You're actually shooting in these rooms. Tell me about that experience and what were some of the challenges you had to face?
I mean, it was something that I was worried about from the beginning,
Why?
Knowing that, well, a cinematographer's worst nightmare is a low ceiling. If you have a low ceiling and you can't light from the windows or from a practical, there's really nowhere to hide lights. So you're just sort of at the mercy of whatever's happening in the room. So most of those hotel rooms are on like the 5th or 6th floor. And the weather changes very rapidly in Hawaii. You're in sun, you're in shade, you're in sun, you're in cloud. And now there's a rainstorm, so even the light that's coming in is constantly changing. Not only the intensity of it, but also the color of it. The color of the sun behind a cloud is very different than the color of the sun when it's out directly. Even if it's not hitting in directly, it's just it bouncing around.
Yeah.
So the lack of control, because of the floor that we're on, and because it's a hotel, it's, outside of each window, there wasn't a place to put a condor with a light. It was really like very restrictive. So I would say 75% of the time, 80% of the time, there's no lights actually. And so I'll continue, which is that each room has a very small balcony, most of them with not enough room to even hide a light. Some of the bigger suites, I was able to like hide like a 4K or something outside, usually bouncing into a mirror, because once you have a light that's that close to a window, it tends to look like a light. So often I'm bouncing that light into a mirror to get a little more distance, so that the throw of the light is a little bit longer, which makes it feel a little bit more like what's happening in the natural world with the sun. But there was rarely enough room for that to happen. It's like I'm either looking out the window often, because I like to see windows in my frames. So I'm either looking out or, there isn't enough room to do it, period. So, the low ceilings were tough. So I, with the key grip, Manny Duran, who I love and adore, and somebody I've worked with a lot, developed a system to basically tack up Astera tubes, and Asteras are these great new devices. Maybe they're not that new at this point, but, Astera tubes, which are color controllable and fully dimmable. So with his help, we built some boxes for the Astera tubes, which were, essentially like a little box with an egg crate on the front of it. And then we put up little tacks like all around the corners of the room so that these things could just kind of get tacked up and taken down very quickly. So we would go into a room, and these asteras would basically be kind of like not always 360 ringing the room, but I would pick like three, I knew which way I was going to be looking. So usually like, if it was this room, I'd pick the window side and put them up, from the window side and then wrapping around, so that I would have a little bit of something to play with to help wrap the light around, and often,
Yeah.
Once you get into closer work, you can bring in something on the floor, or, do something, bring in a diffusion frame, or put a tube that's a little lower, or put a sky panel that's a little lower. But, if you're in a shot that's sort of swinging from one side of the room to the other and handheld, as we were for most of it, I'm the creator of my own misery. I could have just said, no, we're not going to shoot this handheld and put it on a sticks, and we'll do this and we'll do the reverse. But I really operate from the philosophy of the most important thing that the first priority for me as a cinematographer is how the camera moves and the camera's relationship to the actors, and that I prioritize that over the lighting. And if the lighting suffers, then, oh, well, I have to figure it out. I either have to like make it work on set or fix it as much as I can in the DI. But I'm just somebody that prioritizes like how we're telling the story with the camera over the lighting, and I'll figure out the lighting. Like, it'll be fine. Whatever it is, it's not going to be that bad, and if it is, then I'll just cry about it later.
Exactly. Complain about it later. Well, a lot of these interiors, there are moments where the sun is peering through. It's a sunrise, it's the sunset. Are even those moments actual? Like, were you actually waiting for the sun to rise to get some of those sunrise shots of people waking up with the sun peering through? Wow.
Not all of them. It really depends on the scene, but yeah, some of those. I mean, again, a lot of those are a mirror, an HMI bounced into a mirror, because that was the only way that I could get sort of a shaft of light. If you put a light right up against a window, as it comes in, it spreads out. So you can just see, oh, that's a light. I mean, it just looks like a light as it spreads. So, using a mirror, getting that extra distance. So often a lot of those things, people waking up, that's an HMI bounced into a mirror, or if we got really lucky, it was actually the sun. It's all about how you frame things, and trying to create just enough space with the frame to be able to hide a light in there.
Did you take over the entire hotel? Were there no real guests in it at all? The whole thing was a set?
So the beginning of the shoot, we owned the whole hotel. There was no other guests there, and that was about half of the shoot or a third of the shoot. And then slowly, guests started coming. It was Thanksgiving, and there was some guests coming, and we slowly got kind of pushed into a corner of the hotel. In the beginning, we sort of did all of our stuff that we needed to do that was sort of spread out in the hotel. And then we slowly kind of shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. But, we started out and this thing was shot in a bubble. And even as other guests came in, we were encouraged to not associate with them and to keep our distance. And we had our own eating areas, and, we were encouraged to not hang out by the pool with them. And, we sort of hung out at the beach and, tried to stay as a unit beyond. And it was sort of like, very similar to like the NBA bubble, where it's just like, you guys are all here together, and we all got tested, we're all getting tested 4 or 5 or 20 times a week. I don't know. I lost track.
Yeah, I can imagine. In Ozark, you did quite a bit of work on the water and in boats. I see a little bit of work on the White Lotus as well. Did you feel kind of uniquely prepared for the White Lotus, boat and water scenes because of your experience with Ozark? Or were there new challenges, new lessons learned?
I don't think that you're ever prepared for anything. I think you just kind of come in with lessons learned, and what didn't work last time, and you start thinking that maybe what worked last time will work this time, but don't ever get too cocky, because you'll get smacked down really hard. I mean, I would say my approach on this show was very different in some ways. Like on Ozark, we do a lot of stuff on lakes where there's no waves. And we had access to gear, which is like, a crane loaded onto a boat. onto kind of a fast boat, so you can maneuver kind of quickly and get the crane wherever you want. And because of the telescoping nature of the crane, you can adjust, where the camera is at any given moment. And we just didn't, that wasn't the approach here. We were in Hawaii, we were out on the ocean. The swell was unpredictable. And, essentially what I did is I rigged, Frank Larson, who's the camera operator on the show, rigged his Ronin to kind of a fast boat. And we did some of the same stuff, but, I would say that most of the water work that's sort of wider shots was done with a Ronin. And the rest of it was like handheld. I just kind of leaned into, when you see Quinn paddling with the guys in the boat, like that's just Frank sitting in a paddle boat facing backwards, and the AC sitting in one seat behind him pulling focus. And, it's really just was much more of a sort of rugged approach, and all the other stuff. I've just found that, being handheld on a boat is probably the best approach. Occasionally kind of lock the camera down, but mostly it's handheld to sort of adjust and be with them on the boat. It's very unpredictable, but I'm just glad it worked. You sort of just pray. You always just kind of pray when you're doing stuff out on the water.
Yeah. Did you have any big disasters on this shoot? Did you have any major issues, equipment breakdowns or problems or anything like that?
I mean, I think the only problems that we had on the show were some, false positive COVID scares. And that was really the only issue. I think that I was always constantly making the assistants, my first assistant, really nervous by where I was putting the camera. We definitely had a couple, underwater housings that were not waterproof. So there was a couple times where there was some water that was definitely really close to the camera. There was definitely, there was a lot of times where I really wanted the water, the camera, right next to the water, right at the water line. And so, just kind of pushing that. And there was definitely some time that some water got in the camera a little bit, but not enough to end our shoot.
I have to ask you about the sunset in the scene where I'm so bad with names. The teenage son, when he goes out on the beach to sleep, he leaves the apartment. He leaves the suite and goes out on the beach. And the sun is still in the process of setting. And it seemed like it was already nighttime before he even leaves the apartment. So I was wondering to myself, were you guys doing a play on kind of leaning into that being uncomfortable, not really knowing kind of where you are in time and space, because maybe your memories are murky? And you know what I mean? You were talking about evoking memories and your cinematography. Was that purely just leaning into the fact that maybe we don't quite know what time of day it is?
It's always summer and sunset in Hawaii, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how to answer that question without incriminating myself. So I'll just plead the fifth on that.
Well, we're here for the incrimination. We are here for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm not going to answer that one, dude.
Well, I'm going to come up with my own storyline for it, which is that you were trying to make us not totally know exactly what time of day it was.
Yeah, I think it's ambiguous, and it's always sunset in Hawaii. It really is does it bother most people in the audience? You noticed it, so sorry.
The lack of an answer is all the answer we need. I love it.
Yeah.
That's exactly. You left just enough room for rumors to grow. I love that.
I think it's you and 10 other people that care. So I'm going to sleep okay at night.
Well, I'm glad that I'm one of those 10, I guess.
Yeah. No,
they probably are all listening to this show too.
Listen, I think it comes back to what I was saying before, is that I think it's my job as a cinematographer to make something that flows and feels like a whole. And I could have, if you want the real answer, I'll just
Yeah,
be
who
really
cares?
honest. I could have put up an 18K and lit the beach so it looked like quote unquote night, and you wouldn't have seen the water because it would have been pitch black out there. So unless I'm going to put a barge on an 18K on a barge way out in the water and skip it off the water and then adjust the frame so that I don't see it, or wipe it out with VFX and put a moon there so that there's some excuse for there being a reflection on the water, it would basically be a shot of a kid walking off into blackness with some fake moonlight coming from an 18K.
You wouldn't see the whale, which is an important
you
part of
wouldn't
it.
see the whale. So my philosophy is like, I'm going by the path of least resistance, and I want to create a feeling and a vibe and a continuity. And while the light is not perfectly continuity, and there's some light in the sky which suggests that it was sunset, which it was when we shot it, the more important, the priority for me is creating a mood and a feeling that tells the story. So while that shot is not technically perfect, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like
that.
because I think it's my job to tell a story. And if I'm telling you a fable, and I turn the page in the book, and there's a shot of a magical castle against the sky, I'm not interested in the kid who says, "Well, why is it said it's supposed to be nighttime? Why is there color in the sky behind the palace?" Like I want to be the kid, and I want to talk to the kids who are like, yeah, like that's a beautiful castle. You know what I mean? Like that's really a magical place. And I want to go there, and I want to like be part of that story. So I think that that's my job as a cinematographer. And I really respect the people who are very like strict and didactic and like, no, there should be no light in the sky, or it should be this, or it should be that. I really respect those people. Somebody like Deakins is a master at it. And he's like, I never forget, like he still beats himself up to the day. There's a shot in No Country for Old Men where there's like more light in the sky than the next shot, and he's like, in every interview ever, he's like, oh, I that's a major mess up, and I can't believe I did that. And that's like, I'm not Deakins, man. You know what I mean? Like I don't go through. I think I used to really pour through my stuff and criticize myself, but it's like, are people enjoying the series as a whole, and is it creating some feeling and some continuity for them in terms of emotion? And to me, I prioritize that over the technical perfections.
It seems like kind of a theme in maybe your entire catalog, and certainly this conversation. Just you've referenced this idea multiple times of just kind of letting things almost be what they are and thinking about the big picture instead of the small details. And I think that is a really interesting philosophy for a cinematographer. And I almost feel like there are few that could have achieved the greatness of the White Lotus with the conditions that you were given, because I think you really had to. This project needed somebody with a personality like yours, with a cinematography philosophy like yours, to be able to work with real environments and just have things be what they are. I don't think a lot of people could do that and really bring the best out of it.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. I don't know that that's true. I think my colleagues are so talented. I think it certainly would look like a different show, but I don't know that it would not be successful. I think it would just be something different than what I created. The thing that I will say is, that I didn't mention earlier, which is that the biggest challenge of this show was that we were shooting 7+ pages a day. So when you're shooting, like a show like Ozark is shooting like 4 or 5, big days, a really big day is 6. There's some days if you're doing an action sequence where you're shooting 1 or 2. Almost every single day on the White Lotus was 7+ pages. And that's
unbelievable.
That's brutal. And it really is, as a cinematographer, you can just give up at that point. You ask like what it's like to shoot 7 pages a day. It's like, it's by the time that you're shooting the 6th scene of the day and you're trying to figure out where you are and how to really do something dynamic for each scene and, make each scene be its own sort of magical little piece in the whole. It really does take that sort of like overall philosophy, the philosophy of the overall, like how does this piece fit into the overall, and letting go of all of your expectations in terms of like what you thought the scene was going to be, and just really leaning in. We would get to the beach and I'd think that we were going to do one thing, and it'd be an overcast day and the blocking was completely different than what I imagined. It's like, okay, well, how do I make this the best version of this, and just continually show up and be present for every scene. And you're like, you're in like scene 5 or 6 of the day where you're just tapped creatively, and you just still have to continue to show up and do the best you can. And you might not be super proud of the lighting that you did on that scene, or you might go home, they might wrap and you might be like, wow, I wish we did one more because that camera move wasn't quite what I was looking for. Or, the focus, the rack focus wasn't like quite at the right moment, or, whatever it is, or, oh, I should have done it why didn't I do it on a 40 mil instead of a 50? I can go home and just beat myself up about it. Or I can go home and say, well, I did the best I could today. And I really like, as a piece of the whole, does this fit as a piece of the whole? And just be proud of the work that you did, and you have a team of people that are like killing themselves for you. You know what I mean? My crew works so hard for me. Like, I have to say, like, the show and the success of the show is like a testament to my team and like how hard they worked. I don't do very much on set. I operate the camera once a day. I move a flag once a day. Like, I don't do very much. Like, I try to inspire my team to do their best work and sit back and really look at the whole. And is this working? And when you're shooting 7 pages a day and you're constantly getting hammered by weather changes and blocking changes, and you never really know. It's like, you just have to sort of trust yourself and do the best you can every day. And I'm just glad that people like the series. I hope that people appreciate the cinematography, but more than the cinematography, I think it's important that they like enjoy the show, and that you're entertaining people. It's a powerful thing to be able to entertain people.
Yeah, you certainly are entertaining people. The show is, oh my God, a hit. Everyone's talking about it. What satisfaction to just have done all that work, come out of the bubble, and know that everyone is really enjoying the show. It's awesome. And there's got to be a season 2 coming up, which I'm curious. Have you already been in talks about a season 2 with the show? I know they're what I was reading is that they were thinking different location, different cast. Is it the same for the crew too? Different everything?
I mean, I've been talking to Mike about potentially doing season 2 together, and I don't know what the future holds for us, but I certainly love Mike, and he's such a nut. I would love to work with him again. He's such a like interesting, unique human being, and such a beautiful soul. I would love to be on set with him again. So we'll see what happens.
Well, the White Lotus was certainly not the only thing that you did that was really cool and interesting in the past year, because you also did that Paul McCartney video. That oh my God! When I was looking through your Instagram, I'm like, oh my God, he shot that too. God damn, what great opportunities. I mean, we only have a couple minutes, so we can't really dive in, but I have to ask you what it was like working with Paul McCartney and Beck on the Find My Way video.
Yeah, music videos are a lot of fun, and that's something. I just happen to be in LA. I live in New York, and I just happen to be in LA, and Andrew, the director, hit me up and was like, are you in LA by any chance? And I love working with him. You know what I mean? He's just like has a fantastic mind, and I love, I think I'm so lucky to get to work with like different, interesting, cool people who like have, interesting ideas and interesting takes on the world. And I get to come in and just offer my perspective and try to help, just try to be as useful as I can. And that video was insane. I mean, to be able to work with a Beatle is like, I never thought, like I grew up so when I met Paul McCartney, I sort of like, I don't get sort of starstruck, but I definitely just started mumbling something about listening to the Beatles as a kid and being a big fan. I don't even know if what came out of my mouth was the English language. Because
he must get that all the time.
I'm sure he gets it all the time, because he was the nicest human being. And actually, like when we were still shooting and he left, but he sort of like went out of his way to come find me and say like how lovely it was to meet me. And he didn't need to do that. He's a Beatle. So it's nice when you like meet your heroes and they're actually like really sweet and genuine people, and that video was a lot of fun. It was, we shot it all in one day. It was just,
wow.
It was kind of a crazy little adventure, but I love Andrew, the director, and I'd do anything for that dude. So,
and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. I'm sure you guys have already seen it, but it's called Find My Way, Paul McCartney and Beck. Well, Ben Kutchins, thank you so much for coming back on. The White Lotus is awesome. I cannot wait to finish the series. It's all available now. The finale was last night, I think. It's all available now on HBO, so definitely check it out for yourself if you haven't already. But Ben, thank you so much for coming on. And are you working on the new Ozark, the latest season of Ozark?
No, I finished working on Ozark on season 3. So I'm not part of the new seasons of Ozark, but I know a bunch of the crew that's still working on it, and of course I love the cast and Jason. I've been talking to Jason occasionally, and I don't know. I can't wait for it to come out. I can't wait to watch it.
Yes, same here. But thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll have you back for your next project. I always enjoy talking to you.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, I want to thank Ben Kutchins for coming on the show today, talking about The White Lotus, which I absolutely love. And I tried desperately to avoid spoilers in my prep because I haven't seen the whole thing yet. But I really, really love it, and I cannot wait to hear what you guys think. So please let us know in the comments wherever you are watching this or listening to this episode. So thanks, Ben, for coming on. I also want to thank our producer, Connor Crosby from ignitionvisuals.com and Dave Siegel from Siegel Sound. He mixes and masters, makes the show sound so good. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, of course. If you're listening to me right now, you can actually hear... I'm sorry, if you're listening, you can see me and see our guest by watching the episode on YouTube, so check it out. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. And if you're interested in what I'm doing, you can find me at Ben Consoli, BenConsoli, on Instagram and Twitter. I post all sorts of behind the scenes of what I'm working on with my production company and, of course, Go Creative Show stuff as well. Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next week on another episode of the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.